Hey guys, welcome back to the BMW Blog YouTube channel and welcome to Scottsdale, Arizona, or at least outside of Scottsdale, Arizona. The reason why I travel here today is to sample the BMW XM, the one right behind me, but also the brand new BMW M2. More on that in the next video. For now, let's focus on the BMW XM. We're gonna talk about its design, interior design, of course. We're gonna talk about the specs, and then we're gonna go for a drive to see what it can do, because it's quite powerful, and not just quite powerful, it's the most powerful BMW offered today. So maybe let's start with that right away. The BMW XM, it's BMW's first ever plug-in hybrid and performance car. So we might see one in the future in the form of the new M5, but for now, this is really the first one to get a plug-in hybrid drivetrain. So BMW S68 4.4 liter engine, a V8 twin turbo that makes about 644 horsepower and 590 pounds-feet of torque, and that's enough to take this car from 0 to 60 in about 4.1 seconds, or 0 to 62, 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in 4.3 seconds. Most of the power, of course, comes from that V8 engine, brand new engine, designed, engineered by M. It makes about 483 horsepower, with the rest coming from an electric motor. Speaking of that electric motor, it's actually the same one that you see in 5th generation BMW drivetrains, electric drivetrains. So the same one that you would see in the BMW iX and i4 and even i7, for example. So no changes there. The battery pack, same thing, 5th generation of the same technology. And because it has a battery pack, you can actually travel with this car on just pure electric power. Speaking of that, BMW says that on the EPA rating, it gets about 30 miles of range, but if you go on the WLTP standard in Europe, it gets about 57 miles. So, as I said, now let's talk about the design of the car, because it is quite unique, quite different, in some ways controversial, yet at the same time, very different than what you see on the road today. So maybe you see from this shape right here, very, very bold design, a really muscular car from every angle, and of course, very sharp and very bold and in your face. And that starts at the front, because BMW decided to give the BMW XM the split headlights treatment. And you've seen the same thing also in the BMW X7 facelift. So being part of the same category of cars, very high-end luxurious cars, BMW wanted to kind of keep the same look across all these vehicles. So daytime running lights at the top, you have the headlamps right there. Contrary to what we've seen on the XM concept car, it was kind of like a smoked glass right here, but this one it's more see-through, so you can actually see the headlamps inside, but once again split into, and that's what's unique about the BMW XM when it comes to the front lights. Of course, you are getting the same bold and very large kidney grille, but compared to other models, you are getting the horizontal bars. Once again, BMW keeps talking about this being inspired by motorsport, something that you would see on racing cars, and that's exactly what they wanted to go with this car as well. Of course, it's illuminated, so at nighttime you will see this car from behind quite a bit. Actually, I've seen some of the footage out there, and we're going to show you that as well. Once this car comes at you, you will actually see it in night, especially because you only see that kidney grille and something very powerful coming at you. So very cool, very interesting to see on this car. Other than that, it's got more of a shark nose, staying true to the BMW kind of DNA in some ways, because there are not a lot of BMW DNA features on this car, so that's one of them for sure. Of course, if you look on the bottom, you'll see these very aggressive front fascia. So you have these air breathers right there, massive, plenty of cooling going through that, so they're also functional. And of course, you have the central air intake, once again, massive, very motorsport inspired as well, because once again, this is a very, very powerful car. Now, if you take a look maybe a little bit at the hood, you might see a very unique design as well. There are a lot of shapes running across. So you have these two creases kind of coming down and meeting with the kidney grill right there. And then of course you have these central creases which emphasize the airflow going up and down basically. And it's not only functional, but it also looks quite cool on this hood because it's a massive hood and it does need a little bit more flavor than your normal, let's say 7 Series, for example. So plenty of creases, especially on this car. It creates a really nice contrast and it does look interesting, especially under the sun. So that's the front end design. Once again, you can get this with different trims. So for example, I've seen a Marina Bay Blue. This is the Marina Bay Blue color, probably my favorite out of all the colors that I've seen here today. But I've seen it also with a gold trim, and that's gonna stand out a lot more. Actually, the B-roll footage, we're gonna use that particular car to show you that gold trim because it really emphasizes the luxury aspect of the BMW XM. So with that being said, now let's take a quick look at the side and we're gonna talk a lot more about the design right there. So let's talk about the side view of the BMW XM because there is a lot going on here and we're gonna start at the front. First of all, you have these massive 22-inch wheels offered on the BMW XM. They are quite massive and of course they have a very interesting, a very unique design to the XM. So you can see a two-tone color. Very unique design right there, something that I have not seen before on a BMW. Of course, you can spec your M Sport brakes with different calipers in different colors. And in this particular case, you are getting that red caliper, which goes really well with kind of the two-tone blacked out look of these wheels. So massive wheels, P0 high performance tires, and we're gonna have a chance to push this a little bit and see if they're sticky enough for a car of this size. All right, moving on, you have this cladding around the front fender. I'm assuming it's also a functional piece because it also extends a little bit the fender right there, so it kind of closes the gap. Right here, you have the charging port because it's a plug-in hybrid. So basically, it's how you recharge the battery inside the car. Moving on, you have this M mirrors. Of course, it's an M car, so you need to have this on a BMW. They have this belt running across the car, so you can see it going all the way into this shape right here. It's not a typical Hofmeister King. It's actually, I wouldn't call it Hofmeister King anymore. Very unique shape right here, but that's kind of the belt line as they call it. Then of course you have the massive rocker panel on the bottom right here. You can see sculpted in high gloss black. And it's also unique to the BMW XM. The shape overall, I would say it's somewhere in between an X6 and an X7. So I want to say it's very coupe-ish, but definitely coupe-ish enough to give you that feeling of a sloping roofline going in the back. And of course, that also helps with the aerodynamics and with the looks of the car because it's supposed to compete in a segment where you have similar designs. Once again, if you look at the back, you can see another character line running across. So we have this crease kind of going down here and emphasizing the wide fenders in the back because once you see the car from the rear, I'm going to take a look at that, you're going to see how wide it actually is, how massive it looks like. Of course, in the US, it might not look like a really big car, but if you see this on the roads in Europe, I guarantee you it will look massive among the other cars. So once again, a really nice industry design here to emphasize the sportiness of the car. One thing worth mentioning also, of course, these door handles, they are not flushed like on some of the other new BMWs. They decided to stay true to the typical door handle, but it does have a little interesting design right here, kind of 3D shaped. It's more of a plastic, glassy kind of look, but it looks quite luxurious, I would say, for this car. So that's the side view of the car. Now we're gonna go in the back. I'm gonna talk about that because there is one interesting aspect that you might not see on any other BMW. Let's take a quick look. All right, so here is the rear end of the BMW XM. Let's talk about this because it is quite controversial, maybe even more controversial than the front end. So we're gonna start off with the rear window. As you can see, it's got a very interesting, very unique shape right here. Definitely a little bit different than what you've seen on the Concept XM. And it's got this bulbous kind of shape, especially once you see it from the side. So that's one design piece that I've seen a lot of people complaining about. You have the BMW badges engraved on both sides, and that's to pay homage to the BMW M1 supercar. And I'm gonna talk about that a little bit while I'm driving the car, and I can tell you my opinion on that as well. Of course, you have this very bold, very wide taillights, Once again, typical BMW design, they wrap around the car, and you can see they kind of extend all the way into the boot and then just all the way around it. An interesting neat feature are these M stripes. It's supposed to resemble the BMW logo by just having this lit up. So vertical reflectors, once again, it's more of a functional piece on the BMW XM, just like on the M2, and I'm going to talk about that in the next video. But essentially, they sometimes choose to go with a vertical approach because it helps with aero coefficient and aero drag and all of that, but more in the future when it comes to the M2 because it's a lot more relevant to that car. And that brings me right here to maybe the most controversial part of the rear end, and that's the stacked pipes on this new exhaust. So BMW decided to give the XM a different look compared to your typical M cars where you have the quad pipes in a horizontal line. They decided to go vertical and stacked. Once again, it's a piece that's been controversial within the BMW community, and we've seen plenty of feedback on that. But then again, I guess BMW wanted to differentiate the XM a lot more from, let's say, the X5M and X6M. So let's take a look at the cargo space. If I recall correctly, around 527 liters of cargo space in here. It's somewhere in between an X5 and an X7. It does have less room in here than the X7, mostly because of the battery pack that's integrated in the boot of the car. And you can see also the car, it's been raised up a little bit more than what you see on the X5M, for example, or it's X6M, and even probably the X7. You are also getting this very unique BMW XM bag. It comes with the car, it's standard. It's also tied down there, so really nice trick, so it doesn't slide as you drive fast with the car, because you can go really fast with this one. And essentially it's the one that's actually holding the cable charger for the drivetrain. So once again, that's the boot space on the BMW XM. The rear end design, once again, a little bit controversial, a little bit busy. You can see a lot of shapes running across. Definitely a lot of angles compared to the cleaner design that you might see, for example, on the X5M. Nonetheless, we will see if they were right. I guess the sales will dictate if customers will embrace this car, but I will talk about that as I drive the car, because I have a clear idea right now maybe who the customer for this particular XM is. But before I drive, because that's going to be the fun part of the day, let's take a look inside, because this is a very expensive car. So nonetheless, it has to have some specific and luxurious features inside. So will it? Let's take a look. So here is the interior design of the BMW XM. And we're going to start right off with the BMW iDrive 8. So clearly you're getting the same curved display that you've seen in plenty of other BMWs. I don't think we need to talk too much about this. It is just as controversial as some of the design features, and not mostly because it doesn't look good within this car, because it kind of fits the car's character. It's a big car, it's quite wide, so it's nicely integrated in there, so I don't have an issue with that. But I guess the biggest issue that I've been having lately with iDrive 8, it's really the lack of physical buttons, and I've talked about that quite a bit in all the other videos. I'm sure it's getting old by now, but I do have to mention it, because you are getting iDrive 8, which is more of a touch-based voice command type of system, or that's at least what BMW wanted it to be. Then you are losing a lot of the physical buttons and switches right here. So as you can see, you don't have the AC controls anymore right here. They're all integrated part of the screen. So once again, a little bit more difficult to adjust some of the things that you are just used to, like just adjusting right here, simple up and down. There you see like the volume. That was the nice part about some of the switches and buttons for the AC. Of course, they are gaining a little bit of a cleaner look right here, very minimalistic, and at the same time they are able to integrate the vents within this design right here. So you can see the vents are separated by this black piece of plastic right here. So that's a nice integration, looks very, very clean. Of course, you're getting this ambient light that integrates within this console as well. So that's the iDrive 8. Once again, nothing new. We're not going to go through all the settings. I mean, clearly, you know, you have to control some of them via the touch. Fortunately, you still have the iDrive controllers, so that's quite useful, because I do find myself using this a lot more. So hopefully this stays in future BMWs as well, because they finally nailed the iDrive controllers, and I'm hoping it's not going to go away. Speaking of the integration right here, you can see a nice housing for the screen. Of course, you have carbon fiber all around, so that's nice to see in a car, especially because it's an expensive car. This one starts at about $169,000, so not cheap at all. Because of that, you're also getting a very special leather dashboard, leather trim basically here. I think they call it coffee vintage or something similar, but I do like the vintage look. It looks worn out, but at the same time very luxurious, very premium. Speaking of luxury items, you're also getting an Alcantara headliner and all around here as well. Once again, it's got this brownish coffee type of color, and it goes really well with this leather right there, so not bad at all. You have plenty of options when it comes to leather, and as you can see right here, I believe this is probably Silverstone from what I can tell. It's perforated all around, so you can cool or heat your seats. And as you'd expect, they're M Sport seats, some really nice side bolsters. You need that if you want to push the car quite hard. And of course, you have an illuminated XM badge on the headrest. No surprise there, similar to other BMWs as well. The center console is also a little bit different than maybe on the X5M. At the first glance, you might think this is an X5M Plus maybe type of design, and you might be right. A lot of the items are coming from the X5M and X6M, like the gear shifter, the iDrive knob, and this, area of buttons right here. But this piece, it's a little bit different, and it kind of reminds me of the Concept XM, which was really cool. It had this, even more separation between the driver and the passenger, and it was a weaved carbon fiber, which I loved. And I even gave them the feedback last night. I said, that's the one part in all the car that should have stayed in the production series BMW XM, because it was so cool looking, and honestly, it was one of my favorite design features that I've seen in a BMW in a very, very long time. Speaking of one other piece that I wanted to see it in the production XM, it's the steering wheel. So this is essentially the same steering wheel from the X5M, and you are getting these shift paddles right here behind you with their carbon fiber. Quite cool looking, so no complaint there. But I wish they had that concept steering wheel, because it had a flat bottom. It was very futuristic, really cool looking, a lot of weaved carbon around it, so that was really, really cool, and that's something that I hope it's going to stay in the car. Unfortunately not, and I don't think we're going to see that either in the BMW Label Red, which is going to come out later this year, and I'm going to talk about that while I'm driving the car. I guess we can talk a little bit now before I go into the back seat, but I can show you right now maybe a little bit. You have the headliner. It's got a 3D shape. It's very soft, so it's not the plastic that you had in the concept car, probably for crash safety reasons. So you have this really interesting shape right here, and in this particular car, it's kind of like a two-tone design, because you have the coffee color right here, and then you have this Silverstone grayish color that probably matches with the upholstery. So very cool looking, and of course the integration of all the ambient light in there, it is quite interesting. And I guess when we go in the back seat, we can get a little bit closer with the camera and you can actually see it. So I would say that's it for the front, but I guess before we hop out, you can actually see one interesting thing. The doors are kind of scooped in front and back, so you might have seen me kind of leaning on the door because I have a lot of elbow room. So you can see there is a lot of leather room, and that's one thing that I like about the design of the XM inside. Plenty of side space, and that's because of this scooped in design, and I've talked about this in my previous XM videos. But before I do that, let me make sure that this is the right seating position, because I want to measure the leg room in the back. So I would say this will be my ideal driving position. And with that being said, it's time to take a look at the back seat of this Rockstar project, as BMW calls it. Let's take a quick look. Okay, so in the rear seat of the BMW XM, let's start off with these pillows right here. XM branded. I guess BMW wanted to make you feel special for sitting back here. Two of them, of course. You need two people sitting here. It does have space for three, so you have 3 seat belts, so you can clearly fit one more person in the middle. Probably not recommended for long distances. Nonetheless, quite roomy. As I've said, I adjusted my front seat, and you can see how much space I have. I am 6'2", that's about 1.89 meters tall, 1.9. And as you can see, plenty of knee room. I would say at least probably about 7-8 inches. 12-15 centimeters, which is quite good. I feel comfortable. And of course that has to do also with the design of the bench, because as you can see it's kind of tilted backwards a little bit. So once again, a lot of elbow room right there, as you can see, because of that design that I talked about in the front, kind of scooped in. And then of course you are getting plenty of headroom. I would say at least, 4, 5, 6 inches there for my height. So if you're taller than that, you should be fine still. If you are on the shorter side, absolutely no problem whatsoever. The bench is also quite unique because it's got this interesting scoop in the middle. So I'm assuming that also helps if you have a third person, riding right here. It might help not feeling too cramped in there, but very unique design. Also very different than the Concept XM. They had a totally different bench there, which I absolutely loved. Some sort of individual captain seats, but kind of connected together. Absolutely fantastic. I'll make sure to include that in the B-roll footage so you can see it. Other features you have right here, some space holders. You can put your iPad or laptop there, you can do some work. And of course I mentioned the headliner, once again 3D shaped, a very soft material, and once again covered in this Alcantara type of material. It does have a nice contrast, you can see here, even better than in the front with the coffee brown type of thing. And of course these ambient light that I mentioned, you can change that color, and there are quite a few colors available, so you can play around with that. In the back of the seats, USB-C ports. So once again, if you travel with kids and all of that, you have 2 there, 2 on the bottom, so plenty for kids that want to plug in their iPads or any other devices. Once again, the overall feel in the back is that you have a lot of room. It feels like a cocoon in here. So overall, this is the design of the BMW XM. I know it was a little bit longer than usual, but I really wanted to touch some of the important parts. There's some nice, nifty tricks inside here, but we can focus on those on a separate video, a lot shorter. But for now, I think it's enough with the design. So it's time to really drive the car. So how about we jump in the driver's seat and just go for a ride. Alright, so as promised, I am now behind the wheel of the BMW XM. As you can hear that sound, I'm in the full V8 mode basically, but later on I'm gonna have a chance to also try out the hybrid and the all-electric. So before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the new BMW S68 engine. Once again, it's the same engine that you've seen right now in the BMW X5M facelift X6M, in the X7 M50i, and also in the X5 M50i. We will see the same engine next year in a BMW M5. Of course, in the XM, it works in tandem with an electric motor. I mentioned that a little bit earlier, for a power output of 644 horsepower. For now, because BMW is preparing a more powerful BMW XM called labeled Red, which will arrive later this fall. And that's going to produce 750 horsepower, massive amount of power, and a lot of torque. If I recall correctly, they're projecting around 1,000 Newton meters of torque. Speaking of performance, of course, straight line performance, it's quite impressive for an SUV of this size. This is a quite heavy BMW XM. It weighs over 6,000 pounds. So by far, this is the heaviest BMW offered today. Of course, the heaviness comes from the size of the car, clearly close in size to the BMW X7. Speaking of the battery pack, it's a 25.7 kilowatts hour battery pack, enough to give you 88 kilometers of electric range on WLTP and about 30 miles of electric range on EPA rating. Top speed in the EV mode, it's about 140 kilometers per hour or 87 miles per hour. But of course, in the V8 mode, let's just call it that way, you get a top speed of 250 kilometers. And if you get in the M driver's package, you're gonna get about 270 kilometers per hour. So quite a lot of top speed for the BMW XM. I haven't talked much about the 8-speed ZF automatic, mostly because it's kind of always the same transmission, but there is a change in the BMW XM, and that has to do with the plug-in hybrid drivetrain. So because of that, this is a brand new 8-speed ZF transmission with an integrated electric motor. So what it means is that that particular motor sits in front of the transmission with clutches in between. Therefore, the transition between driving modes, for example, from gasoline to hybrid and then to fully electric, is very smooth and in many ways effortless. You sometimes don't even feel that transition in between driving modes, and that's one of the nice qualities of this particular drivetrain. As you can see right now, I'm driving in Scottsdale, Arizona, or near Scottsdale, and I'm gonna have a chance to go on some of these curvy roads. But of course, while I'm gonna focus on the driving experience of the BMW XM, I don't feel like that's the full story of this car, because this is a car that's most likely catering to people that are looking for a very luxurious, higher riding vehicle, something a little bit more powerful, a little bit more exclusive than the BMW X7, for example. So I feel like the typical customer that will buy a BMW XM, it's not necessarily looking for the best lateral G-forces, for the best lateral performance, or even a straight line performance. They are really looking for a very exclusive, very expensive car, something that says, you know, I can only buy this one and you can't. And I guess that's the target for this car, from its exterior design to the interior design and also to its performance. This is really a car that caters to a very, very specific niche demographic. So with that being said, I'm still gonna push the car a little bit because I want to see what it can do. I had a chance to drive a prototype last year in the Alps. It was a rainy day, so I didn't have a chance to really push the car. But hopefully today, because we do have some closed off sections of the road where the police kind of blocked off the road for us, then we can push a little bit more and see what it can do. Nonetheless, we're also going to talk about its chassis, the suspension, and some of the things that are really unique to the BMW XM. So let's start maybe with the drivetrains. So once again, this one sends the power to all four wheels, but as with all BMW XM vehicles, let's just put it that way, they do have a rear bias component. So essentially, when you're trying to push the car a little bit harder, then you're gonna get a little bit more power to the rear. That's gonna keep you on the road, and it's gonna make the drive a little bit more fun. Now, this one also comes with a very unique mode. So if you go into the M mode here, you're gonna have an option simply to just pick between road and sport. But if you go into the setup mode right now, you can customize that even more. So essentially you have a bunch of different settings, as I mentioned in all the other BMWs as well, from the drivetrain settings to the chassis to the steering and the brake. But there are two different ones in this car. One of them is the energy recovery, two options, minimum and max, and I'm gonna talk about that in a second. And then you have the xDrive mode, which of course you've seen it in the BMW X5M and X6M, but it has a little bit of a twist in the BMW XM. It has a new mode called four-wheel drive sand. So let's say if you end up in a more sandy environment, then you can actually activate that mode, and it only works with DSC off. With DSC off, you can also go into a four-wheel drive sport mode, which essentially sends most of the power to the rear wheel, as I mentioned earlier, so that rear bias becomes even more prominent, even more evident in the BMW XM, and it tries to give you probably that BMW rear wheel drive experience. Of course, once again, very heavy car and very tough to compare these to, let's say, an M2 or an M3 as far as the driving dynamics. Now let's talk about some of the chassis suspension settings in the BMW XM. So the XM comes with a new double wishbone front suspension setup with forged upper control arms, aluminum wheel carriers, and lightweight end links. In a nutshell, to simplify that, it actually means that you are getting a different type of suspension and settings compared to, let's say, an X5M, an X6M, because this is a much larger and heavier car. So naturally, they had to adapt the driving characteristics to the car. BMW claims an almost 50-50 front-rear weighted distribution, but of course they weren't very specific if it's a 49-51 or 51-49, but essentially they're always aiming to have the perfect balance in between front and rear. There is no air suspension in the BMW XM, so the car rides on steel springs with new adaptive dampers. Once again, these are unique to the BMW XM because of the car's size and weight. And for the first time, BMW uses a 48-volt active anti-roll bars in the car. Now, to expand on the 48-volt anti-roll system, let's talk a little bit about the specs of that particular system. It can send about 1100 Newton meters to every single wheel. Along with the rear wheel steering, the driving dynamics can be adjusted from soft to very hard, giving the ability to have a comfort and hefty performance while cornering. Another first for an M car is the BMW Integral Active Steering, which is BMW speak for rear wheel steering. Like all similar setups, it steers the rear wheels opposite of the fronts at low speed for improved agility and a tighter turning circle. However, at higher speeds, it turns the rear wheels slightly in the same direction as the fronts for increased high-speed stability. BMW XM also gets an entirely new rear differential designed to cope with the immense torque punch of the hybrid powertrain. Additionally, BMW XM is also getting a near actual wheel slip limitation system. That's a mouthful, but let me explain what that is. Essentially, it's an additional traction control system that monitors wheel slip only, and it's faster than actually using the traditional DSC for the same function. Of course, another benefit of this, it helps the BMW XM keep all that immense power on the ground. The brake-by-wire system also has two different brake pedal configurations, Comfort and Sport. The main difference with the XM is that there is a regen braking component added to the mix, which will add some juice back into the battery under braking. And I'm gonna have one of the BMW experts actually join me in this ride to talk more about that, because there is a difference between the European system of regen braking and the US version. Hello Sarah, welcome!
Hi Horatio!
Thanks for joining me. So I've been driving the car quite a bit today, but there's still a few technical things that I'm not fully familiar with, so I wanted to kind of get your input. You're the project lead or project manager for the car, for the XM. So we're gonna go for a quick drive and maybe we can chat a little bit.
First things first, did you have fun during your drive?
A lot of fun actually. I cornered the car quite a bit. I've talked about that. Honestly, I wish there were no speed limits like in Germany so you can really push the car, but nonetheless,
not
it was
in the
quite
US.
fun. It was quite fun. So I was trying to stay out of jail today. That's the bottom line.
Good idea.
So I'm gonna start with a simple one because I was talking about this one in the video quite a bit. I'm trying to get a full understanding of the technology behind the e-control. So basically you were telling me earlier that if I go into the M hybrid, then I can push here. And then I have three options, right? Hybrid, electric, and e-control. I've talked about the hybrid and of course about the electric, but tell me about e-control and also maybe be specific to if it's different for Europeans versus the US.
Good point, because there is a big difference between the US cars and the European cars. So when you switch to e-control, it's about the battery state of charge.
Okay.
So, you know, we are driving a plug-in hybrid and we need the battery to have the full amount of fun in this one.
Okay.
And so somehow when you use the car and you use the battery gets empty more and more.
Sure.
And when you push the e-control button, there are two different things that will happen. The first thing is in the European cars, you can increase the battery state of charge in the moment where you push the button.
Okay.
In the US cars, for legal restrictions, for homologation and for type approval, we're not allowed to increase the battery stage of charge, so we may not actively charge the battery, but we are allowed to maintain the state of
charge.
Yes. So whenever you push the button, no matter if it's at 100% load or 50% capacity, it stays where it is and allows you so to keep some battery for iDrive zones, for going electric in inner cities, or for keeping the electric battery for more power.
Okay, Sarah, so tell me now the difference between hybrid and e-control, because they do sound a little bit similar.
They are in some cases a little bit similar because it's always both modes, hybrid and e-control.
Okay.
Both are a combination of the V8 engine, so of the combustion engine, and the eDrive. The difference is that in hybrid, the car somehow, depending on the setup, decides on his own, or on its own, better to say, how the drivetrain setup should look like. If you're in an inner city, he will put off the V8, just go electric, and if you request the power by pulling the pedal to the metal, it will add the V8. In e-control, the V8 is always on to keep you the battery maintaining state of charge.
Understood, very interesting. Now, I do have one more question on the setup actually, and I've tried it earlier today, but maybe you can tell me a little bit more. So basically, when I go to setup,
Yes.
I have the option for the energy recovery, which is min and max, or minimum and,
Yes.
and maximum. Can you be specific on exactly the differences, how much you're actually gaining one versus the other one?
There are no values I can share.
So there are no values, okay.
But the charging of the energy recovery goes up to 33 kilowatts. So there is a difference between minimum and maximum.
Okay.
The recovery is always the same in all driving modes. So in hybrid it's the same as in electric or in e-control, but there are no values we could communicate for how is the power of the brake energy recovery.
Okay, understood. So before we jump onto the topic of BMW XM colors, we wanted to talk about that earlier today. We didn't have a chance, so we can leave that for last. Is there anything else specific to the XM that maybe it's so unique, maybe something that we haven't really covered in any presentation, any press release? Because there is always some little nifty trick, left that maybe it's not that important for normal people, but maybe the geeks want to know more about the XM.
Well, depending on which topic you want to, so that there are many specific
so
things.
let's find 2-3 little details, that say, okay, BMW really paid attention to this, and it's something that maybe an enthusiast will truly appreciate.
From my perspective, first and foremost, this is the chassis setup with all the technology we have in the chassis. I think you had it in your blogs as well.
Yep.
That we have all the systems combined, and we have all the systems like the iDrive Professional with the electronically controlled conventional dampers. We have the xDrive. We have the integral active steering, so the steering rear axle, and we have the 48-volt active road stabilization as a system compound. And this is what makes this car really special, because usually at least minimum one of these systems is an option for the customer.
Sure.
So here it's all standard and it's all a package, and it could be applied as a package. So they could get out the last 0.10% of perfection in driving dynamics on that one. So that makes the car very special.
Okay.
And I hope this is what you felt during your drive today.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I moved around in between different driving modes and I was trying all of that. I guess you'll have to spend a lot more time with the car to really get a feel of every single one. And of course, I've talked about the 48 volt in my video based on what you guys have explained to me, but I guess I'll have to really push the car to really feel that, right? Because I feel like if you push the car really, really hard, then you'll get the full benefit of that system.
Yes and no at the same time. What you can hopefully feel immediately that the car is very well based, focused on the rear axle.
So I did. So I talked about that. So the rear wheel bias, it's definitely there. The one thing that I was afraid to try, because I don't want to push the car and get in trouble, but I was thinking about turning off the DSC and then going for the 4-wheel drive sport mode and see what actually does, And the one thing that I talked about, and really haven't got into a lot of details because maybe I didn't know all of them, the 4-wheel drive sand. So essentially that's a new mode specific to the XM. Is that correct? And it's really for any soft surfaces that you might end up like sand. I mean, that's why it's called a sand, probably,
This is because Middle East is one of our main markets for that car, and so they love to drive in the dunes.
Sure.
And so we wanted to give them at least the opportunity to have this sand mode with a specific chassis setup, with the slip differential that is working.
So what does it really do, like more specific, right?
It's like a 4-wheel drive low in the US. So it's something we haven't done before on the next model.
Any reason why you decided to go with steel springs or steel suspension, if you want to call it that way, versus an air suspension?
Definitely, yes.
Okay.
Because air suspension is very well known for its capabilities when it comes to comfort.
Okay.
But it's not that capable of the sportiness of the other bookend like we definitely want to have for a true M model. So this is why we didn't open up the variety, because variety does not offer the opportunity to be precise in the application. So we had to decide for one, and to be capable to keep the brand promise of M in driving dynamics, we got the iDrive Professional.
Gotcha. Okay, so now maybe let's move a little bit from the engineering side, and maybe you can tell me the reason why you decided to go with this headliner 3D shade versus, let's say, a panoramic sunroof.
Again, a very specific decision for that model. You see, we have the M Lounge in there, and
Sure.
we wanted to create a very specific feeling of roominess and of cocooning on the back seats.
Okay.
For sure, the XM remains a driver's car,
Okay.
like any M model.
Sure.
But we wanted, like with anything on that car, we wanted to do something special.
Specific for the XM, basically.
Specific for the XM, never seen before, a true innovation. And to keep up with this backstage feeling on the second seat row,
Sure.
we had to make the decision whether we come with a carbon roof, a panoramic roof, or at least this beautiful headliner, or this very special headliner. And
Gotcha.
we decided for this because it's totally unseen. Never, no
Gotcha.
other competitor has had something similar before.
Okay, very interesting. Good answer. All right, so let me ask you another one then, because one thing that I've noticed the last time that I drove the car, I mentioned that was camouflage, but I've seen the car afterwards. There is no carbon package component right now, like an exterior carbon package, and that's actually a first for a BMW M car, because I would say most of the M cars that I know of, they come with some sort of a carbon package. Do you plan on offering that in the future? Does it fit the character of the car, or?
For us, it's also again a very specific decision not to bring carbon parts on that one, because if you go for an M race car, for example, then weight reduction makes a lot of sense. But talking about a 2.7-ton SUV, it might have been a little bit ridiculous bringing some carbon parts, which will save you 15 kilograms.
But they do look cool though. All right, so I said earlier that we're gonna talk about colors quite a bit, because you have a lot of options, right? And you're gonna get even more from BMW individual. And I'm gonna share a secret with you. I did see a European version BMW XM. It was a pre-production. It was shown in Spartanburg at an event, and that car had an M3 and M4 color, and that was the Sao Paulo yellow.
Oh yes.
So that was quite interesting. We're not going to talk about the specific model because that was not announced, so let's skip that for now. But tell me, what are the color options right now standard, and maybe tell me which one would you pick and why?
Okay, so good that you mentioned standard color options, because we will have special color options. Maybe we talk about that a little bit later. But for now, we have a very broad variety of standard colors, but mainly M colors in the Focus, which are of course the Marina Bay Blue, for example, a car that you should have seen here on the parking lot more than once. And of course, there are more shades. We have a white, we have a beautiful black, we have the individual Dravid gray, we have the Toronto red, also an M color, we have the carbon black in the standard color program, and as of August production we will add the Sao Paulo yellow that you have seen in Spartanburg, and we also add the Isle of Man green, which
so
also works pretty good on the XM. And the interesting thing is that you can combine it with the exterior parts. You know that we have them as a standard in night gold. And you can add, if you wish, or you can replace the night gold parts with the extended shadow line, so making all these parts like the kidney grille, the black band, and the inlets in the rear diffuser black. So, and you can really play with having a specific color, like the Marina Bay Blue is a very good example, because it works perfectly with the golden parts and the golden rim, but it also looks quite gorgeous with the black parts and the black silver rim on it.
So which one would you pick?
So me personally, from the standard program we offer currently, I would definitely go for the Marina Bay Blue with golden parts and the golden rim. I love the golden parts, and I love the golden rim especially.
But tell me, what's next for the XM brand?
So for the XM brand, staying for one more minute with the colors, is that we will offer a really broad variety, more than 15 tones of special colors as of August production. So they will hit the market in autumn. Just talking about a few, we will bring Sepia back to life, which somebody may know from the E46.
Of course, very cool.
We will bring Petrol Mica. We will have Engelsay Green, which some might know as Verde Hermes. So beautiful colors, which really add a specific character to that model. And going away from the colors, talking about a little bit more about the car, we will add even a more powerful model. as of August.
Okay. So that'll be labeled red. Okay.
Correct.
How many horsepower on that one?
748
Okay.
and 1,000 Newton meters of torque.
It's massive.
And also some specific design details, like one beautiful exclusive color, which will be the frozen carbon black. We will have an exclusive
cool.
wheel. We will have red accents in the exterior, so that this car is at a first glance different from
the regular XM.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Very cool. Well, thank you for the information. I guess we're getting back to our drop-off point, and I'm gonna continue my drive with the BMW XM, and I can tell you later, how it feels like, because I feel like I'm gonna have a lot of fun with the car still. So thank you for joining me, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Now let's talk a little bit about the chassis settings, the drivetrain, and maybe even the steering input. Once again, just like most of the new BMWs, if not all of them, and especially the M cars, there is a setup function inside iDrive 8, and you can configure all type of different settings. For example, if you take a look at the drivetrain, you're gonna see the typical 3 settings: a Comfort, Sport, and Sport Plus. No introduction needed there, and of course the chassis has a similar thing. The steering only has 2, Comfort and Sport, and then of course we mentioned the brake already, which has 2 settings as well, Comfort and Sport. So the idea, once again, with the BMW XM, just like with all the other M cars, it's really to provide customers a choice between the different driving characteristics of a car. So let's say that you're the type of customer that enjoys a calmer ride. You can always go into the settings and dial down a little bit the drivetrain, the steering, and all these components, and basically it will give you a more relaxed drive without that added noise and constant bouncing on the road, and maybe a little bit too much heaviness in the steering. But if you want to be that type of customer that wants to push the car like this, then essentially you can dial up all these settings, and you're kind of getting a different type of BMW XM. And this is probably the mode that's going to remind you that this is still an M car, because the XM has been heavily criticized for not being a proper M car. And I mentioned that in my introductory video about the M1. So the XM was actually born last year, or essentially it's come to the market this year, but was introduced last year, which also coincided with BMW M's 50th birthday. So everybody assumed that for their birthday, which is such an important mark in the brand's history, they will do something crazy, something very unique, and naturally everybody was thinking about a supercar, because we've been waiting for that BMW M supercar for quite some time. We almost got one. Was actually called BMW Vision M Next, but unfortunately that project was scraped off, and it's not gonna come to the market, or at least not in that design and configuration that we saw a few years back. So BMW fans and maybe customers too were a little bit disappointed that to celebrate their 50th anniversary, the M engineers and management, of course, they decided to come out with the XM, which is kind of the opposite of what the brand really stands for. I mean, if you go back in time, the BMW M was known for the ultimate driving experience, for the ultimate driving machine, a rear wheel, driven car, a 6-speed manual. Of course, times have changed. We live in a world where the SUV market dominates all the other segments, and especially in the US. Maybe it's not so relevant in Europe, but certainly if we talk about the US and China, big and heavy cars are kind of the norm today, and that's kind of what people really want. So that's how we ended up with the BMW XM, because essentially the BMW M brand is running a business, and of course they have to make money. But at the same time, I'm also a little bit disappointed, because this was a missed opportunity, or is a missed opportunity, to build something really, really cool to celebrate not only the brand's 50th birthday, but also probably the last time that the brand can actually build a typical supercar that has a V8 or a 6-cylinder engine, because we are definitely heading towards full electrification, and the supercars that we know, they will become hypercars, and that's about it. So with that being said, nonetheless, this is still a very, very fun car to drive. I had a chance to push the car quite a bit today in some of these tight corners. Naturally, customers might not have the same driving experience that I have right now, because I came here prepared to push the car quite a bit and see what it can do. I had to stay somewhat within the speed limits naturally, but I can tell you that from that perspective, this car feels a lot lighter than its weight. It does have a little bit more body roll than you would find in the X5M and X6M. Just by looking at the car, I can tell that it sits a little bit higher than these two other cars. So naturally, you can defy physics when it comes to that, and you are getting a little bit more body roll. Nonetheless, there are plenty of tricks inside the car that will help you hide that weight, and you feel like you're driving a much, much smaller and lighter car. Once again, you might have heard this speech before, because I've said it with the X5M and X6M, and it definitely applies to the XM. Of course, this is also more of a test bed for BMW too, because it's not gonna sell in huge numbers like the future M5. And the future M5 will essentially use the same drivetrain that you find in the BMW XM. So the G90 generation M5 and the G99 M5 Touring, yet to be confirmed by BMW, is using the same S68 with a hybrid component, electric motor and a battery pack. And essentially you'll have a lot of power and you'll be quite fast, probably on track and off track, because it's a smaller car and also lighter as well. So in a way, I feel like BMW is really trying out things with the XM and kind of preparing this technology for the future. And then of course we will end up at some point with fully electric M cars, and that's something that we're probably gonna see after 25, 26. I wouldn't be a true BMW aficionado, and certainly not a journalist, if I wouldn't be talking about the steering rack. So as I learned from the engineers, the steering rack of the BMW X5M served as the basis of the XM. But there is a caveat. The new luxury SUV gets new softer tuning along with new bushings. The rear carrier bushings are imported from the M5, from the current generation. The driving experience is also influenced by the large wheel sizes, ranging from 21 to 23 inches. So of course, the steering feels a little bit different than on the X5M. I can say if it's better or worse, but I can tell you that it's a little bit different. I feel like it's not maybe as aggressive and direct as the X5M in the Sport and Sport Plus mode. It seems to be catered more towards comfort and sportiness, but at the same time in the comfort mode it's also not too soft. So I would say it resembles the X5M's steering rack in the comfort mode a lot more than it does in the sport mode. It might also have something to do with the weight of the car and the size, but you know, based on my first impressions and driving the car around some of these bends, that was my first impression of the steering. Maybe it's worth mentioning the iDrive 8. I played with it a little bit more right now, and once again, having to use that voice control, it's not always ideal because it doesn't always work right. And I had a conversation last night with one of the engineers in charge of digital, and there is hope that future upgrades to iDrive will improve also the performance of the voice commands. They will be a lot more intuitive, it will be a lot better to use. So there is hope that when iDrive 8.5 and 9 arrives, we will get an improvement in the voice commands as well. Because right now, you're still having a hard time executing some commands despite the fact that you might be an English native speaker or not. There's still some things that just don't work right. And that's kind of what brings me back to that point that I mentioned a little bit earlier in the design review video, where I kind of wish that some of the simple commands that were kept in the physical world, where you could simply just, you know, turn or press some buttons and switches and perform some of the basic functions of the car. Because I keep saying this, there is a difference in between a UI and UX approach to an iDrive system. Essentially, the UI always wants to be shiny and good looking and all of that, while the UX just wants to be functional, and they kind of butt heads all the time. But I'm hoping that there will be a balance found in the future where you can have the best of both worlds. Now, will I buy the BMW XM? I guess this is one complaint that I have with the car. It's not really its design, which could be subjective quite a bit. It's nothing to do with the performance of the car. It definitely delivers on that front. I'm even okay with the interior design, even though I complain a little bit about the lack of being quite different from the X5M and X6M. But I guess the main issue with the car might be its price, because this particular variant starts at about $165,000, and of course with all the options it can go a lot higher. I don't recall exactly the max spec, but I would assume at least another 15,000-20,000 added on top of this. Now if you're looking at the BMW XM label red, that starts at 189,000 I believe, and that's gonna go over 200,000 easily. And that brings me to the point of the BMW A series and M8. That's still a fantastic product, really nicely done design, very luxurious, very premium, and especially the M variants, extremely fast, despite being quite big and heavy as well. But the issue with those cars were really related mostly to pricing. If you recall, BMW had them over $100,000, and then they dialed back a little bit and they became a little bit cheaper because they're starting to kind of sit on dealerships. So I'm just wondering if the XM is going to have the same fate. Will the novelty wear off after, let's say, 12 to 24 months? Will customers come back and embrace the XM more than they did with the M8? The odds are in its favor. One, because it's an SUV, so clearly that's a better selling point than, let's say, a two-door 8 Series or M8. The second point that has going for it is that it's a plug-in hybrid, so you can tell people, hey, you know, by the way, you can drive in a hybrid mode, you can go all out with the V8, and of course, if you're commuting and shorter distances, you can always use the all-electric mode. So essentially, this might be a better value proposition than, let's say, that particular A series or M8 family of cars. Nonetheless, I think the price is the one that's maybe having people think about different brands, because this is a pretty competitive segment. There are not a lot of cars in that segment, but they're quite competitive. And of course, we have to mention the Lamborghini Urus. That's one of them. So clearly, that's kind of the benchmark in the segment when it comes to styling and maybe even performance, even though the XM, I'm pretty sure, will beat that car when it comes to performance. This is a fantastic engine and a really good drivetrain, so no worries on that front. But of course, there might be that type of customer that wants the latest and shiniest toy, and then the price point wouldn't really matter. They just want to have the latest car on the market, something that's very unique and that what not many people actually have at the moment. So this is where the XM might find some buyers. Where the BMW XM might actually shine, or it already shines, it's really the aspect of having a M luxury product with a high riding position, and of course the utility of an SUV. So once again, you might not be the 7 Series type of customer, but you might be indeed an XM type of customer. So this is where the BMW XM really stands out, having this kind of dual character. And of course, if you mix in that electrification component, then you could say that the XM might be the jack of all trades. It is spacious inside, it offers decent cargo space, it is a lot of fun to drive when you want it to be, and then when you don't want it to be, you can go into an all hybrid or all electric mode, and will satisfy that requirement of sustainability and green and so on and so forth. So in the end, like with all new products, I definitely recommend you going to the dealership and trying out the cars. I know BMW is pushing the car quite a bit, so there should be plenty of opportunities for you starting next week to see the car or your local dealership and go for a test drive. I encourage you to ask them to let you drive the car a little bit longer than the usual around the block test drive, because that's where you will start to experience the full potential and capability of the BMW XM. So with that being said, this is the BMW XM, the 644 horsepower edition. As always, thanks for watching our video, thanks for subscribing to our channel, and I will see you in the next one.